Late July 2021. The night is sliding toward midnight as the Regal Edwards Corona Crossings winds down for the day. Inside Auditorium 9, the forever purge has just wrapped. The credits fade, the lights brighten, and the scattered audience drifts out, quietly, unhurried, leaving behind the usual debris of a late showing. Nothing about the scene suggests anything unusual. It's the kind of slow Monday night theaters barely notice. A few minutes into the new day, a custodian unlocks the door and steps inside, ready to run through his routine. Flashlight, trash bag, sweep the rows, collect whatever's been abandoned. He moves with the rhythm of someone who's done this hundreds of times. Halfway through the cleanup, he spots two people still seated near the back. At first, he doesn't think twice. They look like a couple, lingering after the movie, maybe talking softly or waiting for the aisles to clear. He calls out to them, expecting a quick, "Sorry, we're leaving." Silence. He walks closer, annoyance shifting into unease. His flashlight cuts across the armrest and catches a dark smear. That's when his brain starts wrestling with what he's seeing, because that stain shouldn't be there. He angles the beam higher. The sound that leaves his mouth isn't so much a shout as a raw, instinctive scream. The woman is folded forward. The man is slumped back. Blood stains the floor beneath their seats. At 11:58 p.m., a call hits emergency dispatch. Two people unresponsive inside the theater. Possible traumatic injuries. Then the quiet night ends. Ambulances, police units, and fire crews roll into the parking lot. The building is cordoned off. Theater employees cluster outside, shaken, watching responders rush past them. Inside, paramedics confirm what the custodian feared. The woman is deceased. The young man is alive, but unconscious, fighting for breath. They load him onto a stretcher and hook him to a ventilator before wheeling him out into the night. Meanwhile, crime scene investigators sweep the auditorium. Cameras click, seats, floors, stains. Everything is documented. The room feels suspended in a surreal kind of stillness, as if time isn't sure how to move forward. Nobody on staff knows who the two victims are. Their faces mean nothing yet. By morning, their names will be everywhere. On TV, on social media, in newspapers, circulating far beyond the walls of that quiet Corona theater. The morning of July 27th, 2021 rolls in quietly over Corona. People head out for their usual routines, coffee runs, school pickups, morning traffic. The day feels ordinary on the surface, but a few blocks away, something far from ordinary is already unfolding. Police have sealed off the parking lot of the Regal Edwards Corona Crossings. Crime scene vans are parked in a tight cluster, lights still flashing, and long strips of yellow tape draw a hard border around the building. At this point, the public has no idea what happened inside that auditorium the night before. Even investigators are working with fragments. The identities of the woman who died and the young man who was rushed out unconscious aren't confirmed yet. What the investigators do know is unsettling. No weapon anywhere in the seats or aisles, no sign of a fight, nothing that clearly explains how two people ended up shot. The early notes in the report are painfully vague. Two victims under undetermined circumstances. The lack of a weapon rules out self-inflicted harm almost immediately, which only deepens the mystery. If neither victim fired a gun, then who did? How did a shooter get in and out of a nearly empty theater without anyone noticing? And why didn't anyone report hearing a gunshot? By midday, the first tiny news blurbs appear on Southern California websites. Just a few lines mentioning two victims found in a movie theater, no details, no names. As the story spreads, journalists begin drifting toward the theater hoping for clarity. They don't get any. Officers tell them the investigation is active and nothing can be shared. By late afternoon, the media attention ramps up. Los Angeles stations send crews to Corona, cameras pointed at the blocked-off parking lot. Breaking news banners start appearing online. Double tragedy in Corona, shooter still at large. That's when speculation takes over. Social media attempts to fill the void. Some people insist it must have been an accident. Others jump to theories about gangs or drug disputes. None of it is grounded in fact. Residents, confused and uneasy, keep asking the same question. How does someone fire a gun inside a theater with cameras, staff, and only a handful of people around, and then disappear? Police don't confirm any of the swirling theories. Their only official statement the entire day is blunt. There's no weapon and no suspects. Detectives are combing through ticket logs and surveillance footage, trying to reconstruct a timeline that refuses to make sense. As night settles in, Corona feels unusually tense. The theater shuts its doors indefinitely. Local Facebook groups and neighborhood pages overflow with worried comments. People admit they're now hesitant to see a movie by themselves. Schools and nearby colleges even put out reminders urging the community not to share unverified rumors. Stick to official sources, they warn. By the end of the evening, one more detail emerges. Riverside County detectives and forensic ballistics experts have joined the investigation. Whatever happened inside that auditorium wasn't simple, and the case is already growing far bigger than a local police department expected. At that stage, no one knew who the two victims were or whether they even knew each other. Detectives were only beginning to piece together the final minutes inside Theater 9, reviewing every detail, every timestamp, trying to understand how the night unfolded. Reporters, meanwhile, uncovered something unsettling. The shooting happened during a part of the Forever Purge where the soundtrack is filled with rapid, explosive gunfire. That single detail explained why the few other people in the theater never realized anything was actually happening around them. Real violence had been drowned out by the movie's own chaos. It made the entire situation feel even more disturbing. There was still no suspect, no motive, and no weapon. The following morning, police finally released the victims' identities. The two weren't strangers. They were a couple on a date. Their names, Rylee Goodrich and Anthony Barajas, were confirmed publicly on July 28, 2021. From that moment, what had first looked like an isolated tragedy turned into a statewide story. Anthony Michael Barajas, born August 9, 2001, grew up in Southern California with his family, Bree and Catherine. He had always been the kind of kid who drew people in, confident, warm, easy to talk to. He balanced schoolwork with sports, playing soccer, practicing martial arts, and throwing himself into school activities. Teachers often pointed out that he carried himself with a maturity most teenagers didn't have. In 2019, he joined TikTok. It started casually, quick clips, moments with friends, but his audience grew fast. By mid-2021, he was closing in on 1 million followers. He posted on Instagram too, sharing glimpses of daily life, never acting like he was above anyone. Even with the attention, he stayed grounded and friendly. He wasn't a star in the Hollywood sense, but online and in person, he was well-liked and respected. Beside him that night sat Rylee Goodrich. She and Anthony shared similar energy, ambition, and kindness, though their backgrounds were different. Rylee was the only daughter in a tight-knit family that supported her in everything she did. At school, she was known for her bright personality, captain of the cheer squad, active in volleyball, always showing up with a smile. Friends and teachers described her as responsible, loyal, and incredibly easy to love. After finishing high school, Rylee headed to Grand Canyon University in Phoenix on a scholarship. She studied business and marketing, but no matter how busy college life got, she always made her way back home for breaks and holidays. Staying close to her family and the friends she grew up with was something she never compromised on. By summer 2021, her freshman year was behind her, and she was back in Corona for the break. On July 4th, during an Independence Day get-together with friends, she met Anthony for the first time. He was a little older, relaxed, funny, and had this easygoing charm that made conversations feel natural. They clicked quickly, exchanged numbers, and kept talking afterward. Nothing heavy, just two people enjoying each other's company and seeing where the connection might lead. When Anthony suggested meeting up in person, Rylee agreed, but with one condition: he had to meet her parents first. She trusted their judgment, especially her father's. At first, they weren't sure what to think. Anthony was a content creator, which didn't immediately reassure them. But after sitting down with him, their worries faded. He was polite, steady, and thoughtful. He earned their respect. And with that, Rylee and Anthony set their first official date for July 26th, 2021. They had no idea that the night they were planning, a simple, hopeful summer date, would be the last evening they would ever share. That night, everything started out exactly as it should have. Rylee and Anthony planned something low-key: dinner first, then a movie. They ate at one of her favorite local spots, and around 9 p.m. made their way to the Regal Edwards Corona Crossings Theater. Rylee had been there countless times growing up. It felt familiar, comforting. They picked The Forever Purge, the 9:30 p.m. showing. The theater was nearly empty, typical for a Monday night. The movie's plot centers around a society that allows violent chaos to erupt unchecked, a dystopian nightmare meant to exist only on screen. But on that particular night, the line between fiction and reality would slip in a horrifying way. The bursts of gunfire from the film would mask the real danger happening just a few rows away. No one in that theater could have guessed how dark that small coincidence would become. Around 10 p.m., while The Forever Purge played on, Rylee sent her mom a quick message. Nothing dramatic, just a light complaint that the movie was a bit dull, followed by a smile in words. The company was great, and she was happy to be out with Anthony. It would be the final message her family ever received from her. Inside Theater 9, everything looked ordinary. Dim lights, the hum of surround sound, another burst of on-screen gunfire blending into the action. People ate their popcorn, some got up to use the restroom. No one paid attention to the man sitting alone near the back. He didn't appear threatening, just out of place, unsettled. Investigators would later learn he hadn't come alone. He'd arrived with a small group, but they left early, unnerved by the way he was acting. Nearly 2 hours later, the film reached its climax. The credits were seconds from rolling, and the overhead lights were about to come back on. In that tiny window of darkness, everything unfolded. 2 shots, quiet under the movie's explosive sound design, rang out without anyone recognizing them for what they were. Rylee died instantly. Anthony suffered a catastrophic head injury. The movie ended. Viewers stretched, threw away their popcorn, and walked out. Not one person realized the crime had taken place just a few rows over. When the theater finally emptied, only Rylee and Anthony remained in their seats, unmoving. Rylee's time of death was later placed at roughly 11:45 p.m. 13 minutes after the final scene, staff called 911, unaware they were reporting one of the most shocking cases Corona had ever faced, a crime committed with precision and total anonymity. The shooter had simply slipped away. When investigators entered Auditorium 9, they found 2 bullets, each fired at close range. The angles told a clear story. The shooter had been standing directly behind Rylee and Anthony. There were no signs of a fight, no attempt by the victims to defend themselves. Everything suggested a sudden, targeted attack carried out in silence. Blood was found on the seats on the floor, but nothing else that could immediately explain what happened. No weapon, no shell casings, nothing that pointed investigators toward the gun used. That missing firearm quickly became one of the biggest obstacles in the case. Without it, they couldn't determine the make or model, couldn't trace its origin, and couldn't confirm who might have had access to it. One of the earliest questions detectives explored was whether this could have been a murder followed by self-harm. Forensic analysts shut that theory down almost instantly. Neither of Rylee nor Anthony had gunshot residue on their hands, which meant neither of them fired a weapon. And then there was the missing purse. Rylee's bag, along with her ID and wallet, was nowhere at the scene. That raised the possibility that the attacker had taken it on the way out. Processing the theater was another challenge. Dozens of people had been in and out of that auditorium earlier in the day, leaving fingerprints on armrests, seatbacks, railings, and doorknobs. Crime lab technicians collected hundreds of prints and DNA swabs. None of them pointed to a suspect. Investigators turned to surveillance footage. The parking lot cameras showed cars pulling in and out, but the resolution was too poor to identify faces. Inside the actual screening room, there were no cameras at all. Typical for movie theaters, but devastating for the case. Whatever occurred in those final minutes of the film hadn't been recorded. So detectives worked backward, reconstructing the timeline. Rylee's final text to her mother came at 10:15 p.m. Neither she nor Anthony used their phones after that. The movie ended shortly before midnight. The 911 call came in at 11:58 p.m. Based on that, investigators estimated the attack happened sometime between 11:30 and 11:45. Multiple agencies were now involved: Riverside County Forensics, medical examiners, Corona PD. Every inch of Auditorium 9 was photographed and logged. The bullets recovered were sent to ballistics, and the autopsy confirmed what officers already suspected. Both victims had been shot in the head at close range. The rounds came from the same gun. By the morning of July 27th, a grim picture had formed. The shooter was inside the theater with Rylee and Anthony, fired the shots while the movie masked the sound, and left before the lights came back on. No weapon left behind, no witnesses, no clear reason. One fact, however, stood out above all the uncertainty. Whoever did this acted with precision. This wasn't impulsive, it wasn't personal. It was cold, deliberate, and carried out by someone prepared to vanish into the dark without leaving a trace. At this stage, the case shifted from a tragic mystery to a full-fledged hunt for a targeted double offender. Whoever pulled the trigger had vanished, and identifying that person became the highest priority for Riverside County investigators. Once the physical evidence was documented and removed from the theater, detectives turned to the one thing that might finally point them in a direction: the people who were actually inside the room. The first task was simple: confirm who bought tickets for that 9:30 p.m. showing of The Forever Purge. The cashier remembered that only 6 tickets had been sold. 2 were Rylee and Anthony's. The other 4 belonged to a small group of young men who came in together. With such a tiny audience, logic narrowed the possibilities almost instantly. Either the shooter was one of those 6, or someone slipped into the auditorium without being seen. Theater staff quickly dismissed that second theory. The doors closed automatically, and no employee reported anyone wandering in mid-film. That left the original 6. Detectives pulled whatever data the theater system had, but the trail went cold immediately. Every ticket had been bought with cash. No credit card names, no customer accounts, no digital trail. The cashier could only offer a general description. The group looked like young men in their early 20s, possibly Latino, calm, nothing hostile or attention-grabbing. And since there were no cameras inside the auditorium, a privacy standard in most theaters, there was no direct record of what happened in those final minutes. The only visual evidence came from the parking lot. It showed the 4 men stepping out of their vehicle, grabbing snacks, and walking inside. Nothing unusual, except for one member of the group. A security guard later recalled that he seemed tense, distracted, muttering to himself. Not enough to intervene, but enough to stick in memory after the fact. A disturbing question hung over the early days of the investigation. How did a double shooting take place in a nearly empty room, and no one notices a thing? The answer, investigators realized, was hiding in plain sight: the movie itself. The Forever Purge is set in a world where violent crime is not just common, but temporarily encouraged. Gunshots, chaos, and destruction echo constantly through its soundtrack. And on that night, those fictional bursts of gunfire synced almost perfectly with the real ones. The Forever Purge is packed with blaring sirens, frantic screams, and non-stop gunfire. The shooter had chosen his moment carefully, firing during one of the movie's loudest, most chaotic scenes. The audio masked everything. At first, detectives considered the possibility that more than one person from the group of four could have been involved, but the evidence didn't support that. A coordinated attack would have left more behind, more movement, more mistakes, more physical traces. Instead, everything pointed to a single individual acting alone. The other three men either never realized what had happened behind them or chose not to say a word. They walked out before the movie ended, unaware of the investigation that was about to swallow their night whole. Forensics soon confirmed the obvious starting point. The two bullets recovered were fired from the same gun, most likely a 9mm handgun. That information didn't identify a suspect, but it narrowed the field and gave investigators something concrete to work with. Authorities went public next. They released a statement asking anyone who might recognize the group of four young men from that screening to contact the police. It wasn't much to go on, but those four tickets were the only real thread in a case with almost no leads. Then the momentum stalled. Days passed with no progress, no fingerprints that pointed to anyone, no helpful witnesses, no weapon turning up in a dumpster or riverbed. Whoever fired those shots had known exactly how to slip through the cracks. 3 days after the attack, everything changed. A call came into the tip line, anonymous, hesitant, but specific. The caller said he knew someone who had been acting strangely on the night of the shooting, and that this person matched the description of one of the men seen entering Theater 9. He gave the name: Joseph Jimenez, 20 years old, from El Cerrito, just outside Corona. Investigators ran the name immediately. Records popped up, addresses, background details, and then the detail that locked their attention. Joseph Jimenez was the registered owner of one of the vehicles captured in the theater's parking lot footage that night. The break they'd been waiting for had finally arrived. That tip was enough for detectives to secure a search warrant. Within hours, officers were standing outside a small trailer on the outskirts of town. Inside, they found Joseph Jimenez. Officers later described him as detached and unfocused, his answers drifting, his thoughts scattered, occasionally mumbling or talking to himself. While searching the trailer, investigators uncovered two critical pieces of evidence: a 9mm handgun and Rylee Goodrich's wallet, complete with her ID and bank cards. That immediately shifted the investigation from speculation to certainty. For the first time, they had a direct physical link tying Jimenez to the crime. The gun was rushed to the lab. When the ballistics report came back, it confirmed what investigators already suspected. This was the weapon that fired the bullets recovered inside Theater 9. Jimenez was arrested on the spot and taken to the Corona Police Department. During questioning, his statements veered all over the place. He denied involvement, claimed he'd merely found the gun, but couldn't offer any explanation for why he had Rylee's personal belongings. His behavior worried detectives. At times, he'd become withdrawn, staring off as if distracted by something only he could see. Other times, he'd repeat words or stop speaking mid-sentence. A background check painted a similarly unsettling picture. He had no criminal record, lived alone, and only held sporadic part-time jobs. Neighbors later told detectives that in the days before his arrest, Jimenez had been yelling at night, engaging in heated arguments with someone who wasn't actually there. At the time, no one thought much of it. Later, those details would become central to understanding what pushed Jimenez towards such a violent act against strangers he had never met. For investigators, this moment was the turning point. A random tip had cracked open the case, but now came the hardest part: determining intent and unraveling what drove a 20-year-old to carry out such a calculated attack. After the arrest, detectives located 3 of Jimenez's acquaintances, the same young men who had gone to the movie with him that night. Their statements helped reconstruct the crucial hours leading up to the shooting. According to them, Jimenez had been acting strangely even before they entered the theater. He muttered to himself, seemed tense, avoided conversation. At the ticket counter, he barely spoke, then abruptly broke into nervous laughter. Once inside the auditorium, his behavior escalated, whispering under his breath, jerking his head around, scanning the room as if bracing for something unseen. Roughly half an hour into the film, he stood up and told his friends he was going to the restroom. When Jimenez finally returned to the auditorium, he was holding a small box. One of his friends asked what it was, and Jimenez answered, almost casually, "It's a weapon." At first, the group assumed he was joking. He had a strange sense of humor sometimes, but the look on his face shifted quickly. Whatever was happening with him that night was beyond anything they'd seen before. Uncomfortable and unsure of what to do, the group quietly slipped out of the theater. They didn't alert security and later told investigators they never imagined he was capable of violence. He'd always been odd, they said, but never dangerous. Detectives dug for any link between Jimenez and the victims, mutual friends, online messages, shared history, but nothing came up. There was no connection at all. The working theory became clearer. This wasn't targeted. It was random and carried out by someone in severe psychological crisis. In a later interview, Jimenez admitted to the shooting but insisted it was self-defense. He said he'd been hearing voices. One voice in particular, a woman he called Abigail, had been warning him that people were out to hurt him. According to him, she told him that locals were watching him, that groups from nearby neighborhoods wanted him dead. He also said he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had stopped taking his medication days before the shooting. Without it, he claimed, the voices grew louder and more commanding. Abigail, he told detectives, urged him to act first. On the day of the attack, surrounded by the violent imagery of the forever purge, he felt cornered, convinced the movie scenes were directed at him. He stepped out, retrieved a 9mm handgun he'd previously purchased for protection, and returned to the theater. What happened next, he claimed, wasn't his decision, it was the voices. That explanation created a major legal dilemma. Was he truly in the midst of a psychotic break? Or was he using mental illness as a shield to avoid responsibility? Meanwhile, Anthony Barajas was fighting for his life at Corona Regional Medical Center. Surgeons worked through the night, neurologists evaluated him repeatedly, but he never woke up. Anthony remained on life support as thousands of people rallied for him online under the hashtag #PrayForAnthony, hoping for a miracle. On July 31st, 2021, doctors declared him brain dead. His parents, surrounded by family, made the agonizing choice to remove life support. Later that day, Anthony was officially pronounced dead. He had registered as an organ donor, and because of that choice, several people received life-saving transplants, one of the few bright spots in a devastating week. A memorial service brought hundreds together. Relatives, childhood friends, classmates, and followers who had watched Anthony grow online. For Rylee's family, attending that service meant reliving the loss all over again. Two families who hadn't known each other before were now bound by unimaginable tragedy. Anthony's death turned the case into a double homicide, shifting prosecutors toward pursuing premeditated charges. The trial began in February 2024 at Riverside County Superior Court. Prosecutors argued this was a deliberate act, planned, intentional. The defense countered that Jimenez was legally insane, suffering from schizophrenia so severe that he couldn't understand his actions. But prosecutors pointed to specific choices he made, stealing Rylee's wallet, hiding evidence, and fleeing the theater. Those, they argued, were the actions of someone aware of what he'd done. A key witness, Carlos Gonzalez, one of the friends who went to the movie with Jimenez, testified about his disturbing behavior that night, the muttering, the anxiety, the sudden exit, and his return holding a weapon. Psychiatric experts took the stand as well, offering conflicting reports. One acknowledged the schizophrenia diagnosis, but emphasized that Jimenez still knew right from wrong. Another testified that despite his mental illness, he understood the consequences of his actions. After weeks of testimony and arguments, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty on 2 counts of first-degree homicide and theft. Rylee's and Anthony's families were in the courtroom when the decision was read. For them, the verdict closed the legal chapter. But the emotional weight of what happened, the randomness, the loss, the lives cut short, never truly settled.